The human fleet was on the brink of annihilation. The cold, relentless waves of alien warships descended like a storm, their massive, angular forms blotting out the stars. The Zelvins, an emotionless, hive-minded race, had been marching through the galaxy for decades, erasing entire civilizations without hesitation. Earth, the last stronghold of humanity, was all that remained. But even its defenses were crumbling. The mighty ships of the Earth fleet were crippled, burning in the black void, their shields flickering out one by one. Inside the command center of Earth's flagship, the Argonaut, General Helen Miles stood before the holographic display, her face pale with exhaustion but resolute. Around her, officers and engineers scrambled in a panic, their voices rising in a cacophony of futile pleas for reinforcements. But there was no one left to help. The Zelvins had cut off all communication from Earth's colonies, their ships blotting out any hope of survival. "We're losing," muttered Lieutenant Kieran, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "There's nothing left to stop them." Helen's steely eyes never wavered from the display. Her fingers hovered over the console, but she couldn't bring herself to hit the button. In the distance, the lead Zelvin ship, the Oblivion, fired again, its energy weapon a streak of light that consumed another section of the fleet. "Damn it, we can't lose now," she muttered almost to herself. She looked over her shoulder at the small team of scientists gathered in the back of the room. They had been working for months, testing theories about a long-forgotten weapon, an ancient relic of humanity's war god ancestors. Their mission was supposed to be a last-ditch effort to reverse the tide of battle. But time was running out. "Is it ready?" she asked, her voice hard with urgency. Dr. Alicia Halvorsen, the lead scientist, stepped forward, her face pale and drawn. Her once hopeful eyes now mirrored the despair around her. "It should be, but we've never tested it. We don't even know what the activation could do. It's dangerous." "Activate it," Helen commanded, cutting her off. "We don't have time for doubt." Alicia hesitated, but only for a moment. She moved to a console, her hands shaking as she typed in the sequence. The air around them seemed to hum with an ancient energy, and for a brief moment, the room was plunged into darkness. Then, a piercing red light flooded the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Helen's heart raced. "What is happening?" The ship's systems began to recalibrate, and a low, vibrating hum filled the command center. On the holoscreen, a map of Earth's defenses flickered back to life, but it was different now, more precise, more intricate. It was as though the very essence of the planet had come alive, and with it, a power long dormant stirred. A voice, a deep, resonant tone, echoed through the chamber. It was almost a whisper, but it reverberated with the authority of ages. "The war gods are awakening." At that moment, Helen realized that the weapon they had unearthed was not just technology. It was something much more. It was a part of humanity's genetic code, a potential locked away within them since the dawn of civilization. Their ancestors had been warriors, great conquerors of the stars, gods in their own right. But in their wisdom, they had sealed away their power to prevent themselves from destroying everything they had built. For generations, humans had lived unaware of the dormant force in their veins. But now, with their backs to the wall, that power was stirring, calling them to rise once more. The first tremor of the awakening came in the form of an eerie silence. The hum in the air stopped, leaving a profound stillness. Then, something within Helen shifted. She felt it, a surge of energy, an overwhelming sense of strength flooding her body, as if the weight of the universe itself had been placed on her shoulders. "General, we're receiving an encrypted transmission from Earth's surface," reported Lieutenant Kieran, his voice trembling. "It's a command." Helen nodded, suddenly understanding. She tapped a button on the console, and the transmission played. It was a message from Earth's last remaining military leader, Admiral Tessa Westbrook, whose forces had been fighting a desperate battle on the ground. "This is the final order." Admiral Westbrook's voice crackled through the speakers. "Activate the gene sequence. Let it awaken. Humanity's last hope lies in our ancient past. The war gods have returned. The room was deathly quiet. Helen's pulse quickened as the weight of the message settled over her. This was it, the final, irreversible step. "I have the gene sequence," Dr. Halvorson whispered, her fingers trembling over the console. "Activating now." A bolt of searing pain shot through Helen's body, and she staggered back, her vision blurring. For a moment, she thought she might collapse, but then the power surged through her veins again, stronger this time, as if the very core of the earth was feeding her the strength she needed to fight. Suddenly, a strange voice, cold and mechanical, broke through the reverie. It was the Zelvins. Their invasion fleet had halted, as though waiting for something. "Humans," their leader's voice boomed over the comms. "You are not worthy of this galaxy. Your extinction is imminent. Surrender now, and we will spare your world." Helen's lips curled into a grim smile. She straightened, feeling the power coursing through her. "We will never surrender," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "And you are about to learn why." The air crackled as the Argonaut's weapon systems powered up. But now it wasn't just technology that guided them. It was something ancient, something primal. The dormant war gods of humanity had been awakened. As the fleet began to respond, launching a counteroffensive, Helen looked out the viewports at the massive Zelvan armada. They were formidable, yes, but they had no idea what was coming. The first strike was a precision shot from the Argonaut's cannons, tearing through the Zelvan's lead ship with unprecedented force. In the chaos that followed, as the fleet rallied under her command, Helen couldn't help but wonder if they had truly awakened something beyond their comprehension. But as the battle raged on, one thing became certain. Humanity, for all its flaws, was a force to be reckoned with. And this war had just begun. As the first wave of enemy ships fell, Helen stood at the helm, her gaze unwavering. "Prepare for the next phase," she ordered. "We're just getting started." With a surge of power in her chest and fire in her eyes, she knew they had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was once theirs. The battle had shifted. From the ashes of humanity's near destruction, a glimmer of hope had emerged, but it was fragile, uncertain. The Zelvan armada still loomed overhead, an unyielding, cold force that had consumed entire star systems with ruthless efficiency. They had underestimated humanity's dormant potential. But now, as the Argonaut's weapons rained fire upon them, they faced an enemy whose strength was no longer just technological. It was something older, something deeper. The war gods had awakened, and with them, humanity's edge was becoming clear. General Helen Miles stood at the heart of the command center, her fingers tight around the edge of the table. The power that surged through her veins was overwhelming, yet she held it in check. It was as if she could sense the pulse of the earth itself, a deep connection to the planet's ancient past. But this wasn't about the power within her. It was about her people, the ones who had fought for so long, against so many odds, and never given up. Now they had a fighting chance. "Lieutenant Kieran, status report," she commanded, her voice steady despite the weight pressing on her chest. Kieran's face was grim. "We got an opening, General. The Zelvins are pulling back, trying to regroup, but we're losing fuel. Our supplies are running thin. We'll need more time." Helen's gaze flickered to the display, where the remnants of the Earth fleet were scattered, still holding their ground. She could see the determination in their eyes, even over the comms, the way they fought with the grit of a species who had been knocked down countless times and kept rising. "We won't need much more time," she said, eyes narrowing. "Activate the secondary defense strategy. All remaining forces, prepare for Phase 2. We're going to take the fight to them." Behind her, Dr. Alicia Halvorson was hunched over her terminal, her face drawn with exhaustion but lit with a fierce determination. She had been the architect of the plan, the one who had unlocked the secrets of the war god gene. She had witnessed humanity's transformation firsthand, and now she was watching it unfold. But she wasn't ready to celebrate. "It's not enough," Alicia muttered under her breath. "The power surge is unpredictable. The gene is not just physical. It's altering something deep within the neural networks of our soldiers. They're becoming something different." Helen turned to her, the flicker of concern briefly crossing her face. What do you mean, different? Not all of them can handle it, Alicia said quietly. The human mind wasn't meant to tap into such raw power. Some are losing control. It was true. As the dormant gene awoke, so did latent instincts. Instincts of war, of destruction. Not all soldiers could wield the power and still hold on to their humanity. But they were the last hope. There was no turning back now. Then we do what we must, Helen said firmly. She met Alicia's eyes. Make sure we have a safeguard. We won't let them become monsters. Understood? As the countdown began for Phase 2, Helen turned her focus back to the battle. The Zelvins, meanwhile, were attempting to re-establish their assault, though their initial confidence had faltered. They had underestimated the human spirit, but now they were beginning to realize just how much they had misjudged. On the front lines, Captain Joshua Drake was among the first to feel the full weight of his new abilities. His squadron had been torn to pieces in the opening rounds of the battle, but with the war god gene coursing through his body, he felt unstoppable. His hands gripped the controls of his fighter with precision, but his mind felt sharper than it ever had. Every movement was calculated, every angle anticipated. Captain Drake, his comms officer, called out, "We're going in. We got a chance to hit the Zelvin flagship." "Understood," Drake replied, his voice a mixture of calm and excitement. "Let's show them what they're dealing with." As his squadron moved toward the heart of the Zelvin fleet, the air crackled with anticipation. The power surging through his body was intoxicating, but he focused, determined not to let it control him. His squadron closed in on the Oblivion, the lead Zelvin ship. He could feel its presence, looming in the distance, a massive shadow that seemed to warp the very fabric of space around it. "I'll take the lead," Drake said, his eyes narrowing. "Stay tight and follow my lead." The Oblivion's defenses were formidable, but they had never faced a force like this before. Drake's mind seemed to move in perfect synchronization with the battle. He darted in, weaving through enemy fire, his ship's engines roaring as he sliced through the Zelvin lines with brutal precision. His squadron followed in perfect harmony, their weapons synchronized like a well-oiled machine. They hit the Zelvin flagship's shields with a barrage of fire. The shields rippled and sparked, but they held barely. Drake pushed harder, his fighter weaving through debris and enemy fire, his mind sharp and focused. He felt the raw power within him, his pulse quickening as he used the same strategies he had learned in countless battles, now amplified by the gene. "We're through," one of his pilots shouted over the comms. "We got a clear shot." Without hesitation, Drake lined up his fighter's cannons and fired a direct hit on the Oblivion's shield generator. The explosion was deafening, and for a moment, everything went silent. The Zelvin flagship staggered, its shields flickering and finally failing. It was vulnerable. "Now!" Drake yelled. "All units, focus fire on the main reactor." As the Earth fleet rallied, bringing every weapon to bear, the Zelvins struggled to maintain control. Their once imposing defenses were faltering, their strategy in disarray. The tide was turning, but not without a price. Drake felt the pull of the power inside him, the hunger for more, the instinct to strike harder, faster, more recklessly. But he forced it back, focusing on the mission, on saving his people. On the command deck of the Argonaut, Helen stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the battle. The humanity in her heart, the fierce love for her people, for her home, was the very thing that gave her strength. She knew they could win this. She had seen it in the eyes of her soldiers, in the fire that now burned within them. "Phase 2 is a success," Kieran reported. "The Zelvins are retreating." Helen felt a rush of relief, but it was tempered by the reality of what had just happened. The battle was far from over. The war gods were awake, but they were also wild. Humanity had tapped into something far greater than anyone had expected. What they did with that power, how they used it, would decide their future. "Get ready for the final push," she said, her voice unwavering. "We have one chance to end this." As the Earth fleet regrouped and prepared for the final assault, Helen looked out at the stars, her heart heavy with the weight of their choices. They had awakened something ancient, something dangerous. But in doing so, they had given themselves a chance to fight, to survive. Whether that would be enough, she didn't know. But she did know one thing. Humanity's edge was no longer a secret. And the Zelvins had made the mistake of thinking they were the superior force. The final push was coming. And this time, humanity would not be caught unprepared. The final push was upon them, a clash of wills and weapons that would decide the fate of humanity. The Argonaut's engines thrummed with power as it led the charge, its hull scarred from the earlier battle, but still resolute. The Zelvins, though retreating, had regrouped and were preparing to make one last stand. Their superior technology was formidable, but they had underestimated the raw tenacity that now burned within humanity's ranks. The war gods were no longer just a myth. They were real, and they had given humanity the strength to rise. General Helen Miles stood at the command center, watching the battle unfold on the holoscreen. Her fingers hovered over the controls, her mind sharp, calculating. The power within her was no longer a foreign thing. It was a part of her, as natural as breathing. But she kept it in check, focused on the task ahead. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting to prove that humanity's greatest strength lay not in its technology, but in its spirit. "Lieutenant Kieran, are we ready?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying no hint of the anxiety that lingered just beneath the surface. "We're ready, General," Kieran replied, his voice clear. "All ships in position. The Zelvins are trying to fortify their flagship, but they've lost their cohesion. They're not the machine they think they are anymore." Helen nodded, a cold smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She knew the Zelvins' fatal flaw, their inability to adapt to unpredictability, to emotion. They were a race of machines, calculating and cold, incapable of understanding the chaos and passion that drove humanity. That had been their greatest mistake. Now it was time to show them the full extent of human resilience. She turned to Dr. Alicia Halvorson, who had been tirelessly monitoring the genetic alterations in their soldiers. "Any signs of instability?" Helen asked, her voice quiet, but filled with a sense of urgency. Alicia's eyes were bloodshot, her brow furrowed with concern, but her resolve was unshaken. "We've had a few casualties, General, but the majority of our soldiers are handling the surge. They're stronger than we could have imagined." Helen allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The human edge had proven more than just a theory, it was real. But that didn't mean the fight would be easy. The Zelvins were cunning, and they would not fall without a devastating counterattack. On the battlefield, Captain Joshua Drake's squadron closed in on the Oblivion, the flagship that had led the Zelvin invasion. The once pristine surface of the ship was now scarred from their previous assault, its defenses weakened but still formidable. Drake felt the power coursing through him as he guided his fighter toward the enemy vessel, every instinct sharpened, every calculation precise. He could feel the pulse of the war god gene in his veins, a reminder of the power he held, but also the responsibility. "Drake, take your squadron in on the left flank," came the command from the Argonaut. "We'll hit them from the front." "On my mark." "Understood, General," Drake replied, his voice tight with focus. He didn't need to hear the mark. He could feel it in his bones. The battle had become a symphony, each movement calculated with perfect precision. The air around him hummed with the energy of the fight, the stars a blur as his fighter darted between enemy ships, launching attack after attack with an accuracy that was almost supernatural. His mind was sharp and his actions instinctive. He wasn't just leading his squadron, he was becoming the war itself. As they neared the Oblivion, a new wave of Zelvin ships appeared, breaking through the cloud of debris that had once been part of the fleet's rear guard. Their energy shields flared to life, bright and angry against the blackness of space. "We've got company," one of Drake's pilots shouted, but there was no fear in his voice. They had learned to work together, to trust each other, and to trust the power that had been unlocked within them. "Stay focused," Drake barked. "We've been through worse. This is nothing." The battle raged on, the tides of war shifting with every passing moment. Helen's fleet pressed forward, striking with relentless precision, while the Zelvins tried desperately to regroup. But it was clear now, humanity was no longer playing by their rules. The Zelvins' cold, Methodical calculations were no match for the sheer unpredictability of human resolve. On the command deck of the Argonaut, Helen's gaze never wavered as the enemy flagship loomed larger in the distance. The final moments of the battle were at hand. It was time for the last gambit. She was about to order a full-scale attack when the comms lit up with a voice she had never expected to hear. "This is Admiral Westbrook," came the crackling transmission. "We've received intel from an unexpected source. The Zelvan's fleet has a weakness. Their central command is housed within the Oblivion. If you can disable their command core, the entire fleet will collapse." Helen's pulse quickened. This was it, the critical weakness she had been waiting for. But there was one problem. The Oblivion's core was buried deep within its structure, heavily protected by the best of their technology. It would take everything they had to breach it. "We'll need to strike now," she said, her voice steely. "Kieran, prepare for a full assault on their central command. Drake, can you hold the line long enough for us to get through?" "Leave it to us," Drake replied without hesitation. "We got your back." The Argonaut surged forward, its weapons charging, as the fleet pushed into the heart of the Zelvan defenses. Helen's thoughts were razor-sharp, her instincts leading her every step of the way. As the first volley of fire hit the Oblivion, she knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy fleet collapsed. Humanity's strength was not in their weapons, but in their unity, in their creativity, and in their refusal to accept defeat. The Oblivion's shields flickered and failed, the massive ship staggering under the assault. Drake's squadron was relentless, keeping the Zelvans occupied while the Argonaut and the rest of the fleet advanced toward their target. "Now," Helen whispered. The Argonaut's cannons fired in perfect sync, the blasts carving through the Zelvan ship's defenses, piercing deep into the command core. For a moment, everything seemed to pause, the silence in space, the final blow hanging in the balance. Then, with a resounding shockwave, the Oblivion's command center detonated, sending ripples of destruction through the Zelvan fleet. It was over. The Zelvans, once a powerful and unyielding force, were scattered and leaderless. Their dominance had crumbled in the face of humanity's resilience, ingenuity, and spirit. But as the victorious fleet stood in the quiet aftermath of the battle, Helen couldn't shake the feeling that this victory, though hard-earned, was only the beginning. They had proved their strength, their ability to rise from the ashes. But what would they do with the power they had unlocked? Looking out into the stars, Helen allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The war gods had awakened, and humanity had triumphed. But the universe was vast, and they had just begun to understand the true depths of their potential. The question now was, what would they do next?